was persecuting the first, well, we will call them Christians, but they were known as Messianic Jews because there was only Jews back then that were following Jesus. So they were known as the Way, right? So Rav Saul, who was a hardcore Pharisee, who was very well educated in the Torah, and there was not much you could trip him on, but he had never met Jesus, right? Until he was on the road to Damascus. An interesting place for a guy like him to be traveling would be Damascus at the time. But he didn't know that that was where he was supposed to go. But not to do what he thought he was going to do. Okay? He was a persecutor of those who followed Jesus Yeshua. Okay? He was the rabbi to the Gentiles. He did not come to abolish the laws or the prophets. He came to teach them. As Jesus Yeshua himself said, I did not come to abolish the law, but most people forget about the fact that he says, and the prophets. Okay? This is going to tie in to where the celebration of December 25th comes in. Okay? Now, the Apostle Paul went to, after his conversion, we all know what happened to him. He was struck down and made blind. Okay? And he was given the harshest job to do, right? Something that really made him probably sick to his stomach because he hated Gentiles, okay? But his job was to go to the Gentiles. That's what Jesus said, right? We're going to see how humble you are. We're going to see if you're going to obey, right? We gave him the most difficult job. In the first century, after the destruction of the temple, right, there was much persecution, right? And the first church, which the Catholic Church like to claim was theirs, but we have a different Catholic Church now than we had then. The first bishop of the Catholic Church was actually a cousin to Jesus Yeshua, okay? And they followed the biblical feasts, and December 25th, which comes to us from, and the earliest writing that we have comes to us from a man by the name of Hypotimius. It's a very hard name to this. The Greek is not good for me either, okay? But anyway, he was a staunch follower, right? And the description of this celebration of December 25th came from the prophecy in Daniel chapter 4, which when you guys get time, I want you guys to read through Daniel a little bit, okay? Chapter 4 and chapter 9, okay? Would be some homework for you. Anyway, how does this relate to Jesus' birth? Well, basically, the reason for the celebration on December 25th is because it was on the Gregorian calendar, which was the calendar that they were following, right? It was the end of the biblical year, right? They had gone through all of the biblical feasts, which are 7, plus 2 other celebrations. One is Purim, and the other one is Hanukkah. Now, when we read our Bible, we know that Jesus attended, it's in your English Bibles, it's called the Feast of Dedication or the Festival of Lights. It happens in the month of December as well. And it comes just before Christmas. Very interesting. Now, for your study, I don't know if you guys have access to it, but I would encourage you to try, you can Google it, you can download the books of the Maccabees, okay? First and second Maccabees. And this gives you the history of where Hanukkah comes from. It's a battle that the Greeks had enslaved the Jewish people and were going to completely annihilate them. Okay? They were not fighting the battle the way God had told them. They had gone against. I'm doing a quick one here, okay? There's a lot to this. But basically what happens here is even though they're disobedient, God still gets them through it, and it's a miraculous win. Now, had they have not won this battle, the entire tribe of Judah would have been wiped out, and you would not have the seed of David. In other words, God would not have been able to fulfill his promise of the coming Messiah through the seed of David. Okay? So that's an important one. The Book of Esther, right? Now that's an important one. Okay? So they celebrated the Book of Esther in October, right? Around the same time as we now had. Now here's the thing. Satan likes to throw off the game. So they don't celebrate it much here, but in North America, a lot of people celebrate Halloween. So we have the celebration of the Book of Esther. And they dress up for this celebration, and they celebrate the another great defeat. That if Esther hadn't have been obedient and done what she did, again, we would not have the seed of David. Right? Now we look at another biblical feast, which Christians call Easter, but we call it Passover. Right? Which actually is the proper way to look at it. Okay? Because Passover comes from Exodus, right? It comes from the people being exiled out of Egypt, right? Where the blood was put over their doorpost, right? And they were passed over, right? By the angel of death. This is a foreshadowing of what Jesus was coming to do. Everything that's in Scripture is a foreshadowing of things to come, right up until the end time. Okay? So, the purpose of the celebration, or the way that it was celebrated in the first century, which we're going to get to soon as to who started this, okay? This hypothesis. He was one of them. But there was a celebration, but it was not what we know it to be today. So what we want to do is we want to reflect on what is the celebration of Christmas. Right? Jesus spoke to the Pharisees very harshly. Do you remember? About what they were doing as far as traditions of men. Now, they didn't make up traditions as far as a new celebration. These traditions of men that he was speaking of, they were taking the biblical feasts, right, the way they dealt with the Sabbath and all these other things. They were making their own rules, adding their own traditions. Like with Hanukkah, Jesus comes into the temple and he throws over the money changer tables. They added all these things to what was a beautiful celebration. The purpose of the celebration that we have is to celebrate God and his promises. The fact that the true miracle of Christmas is we need to look through our Old Testament. Let's start with Abraham, right? Let's look at Abraham. Was Abraham a faithful man? He was in the end, but he made a lot of mistakes. He was told, don't take your family with you. And he did. Right? He made a lot of mistakes. We can go through all. Well, I have a few teachings here because I tend to go off. So I like having them written out, and then I like to read them. So that's what we're going to do. So we're going to touch on these subjects a little bit, okay? So we're going to, like I say, you have Abraham. Abraham did a lot of things that weren't right. He told the king that, Sarah was his sister, his wife. He lied. He wasn't trusting God, right? He wasn't trusting that God would bring him through it, that God had it under control, right? The same thing happened in the desert, right? In Egypt, okay? Where we have the story of, the Passover. It was great. They all got out. They all got through, taken through, which is a symbol of baptism. They got brought through the Red Sea, the first, right? And everything, and all of the soldiers were crushed. Now they're brought into the desert Complete disobedience. So the entire generation that made it out of Egypt, except for 2, died in the desert. So the celebration of Christmas, again, is about the great gift we've been given, right? The great gift is that there was a birth, that there was a life, there was a teacher, a rabbi who came and gave us something. But who was this man? In Isaiah chapter 43, I believe, it says, Yad-He-Vav-He, who is Yahweh, right? I am your only salvation. Yeshua Jesus came to give us salvation. So who is Yeshua Jesus? It's God manifested in a man. Is it the first time that happened? That's right. It is not. The first time it happened is in front of Abraham at the door, where you have 3 men. You have 2 angels and you have God. Manifested as a man. But the first time was in the garden. Who was walking with Adam? God is invisible. Our Heavenly Father is invisible, so nobody can see God, right? Nobody has seen God, right? We're living in a time when this is critical, where we are getting Christians are getting bombarded with so much anti-Christian, anti-missionary, right? Coming not just from the Jews, but from Muslims, and Christians need to be. We need to sharpen our weapon. Our weapon is our Bible. Okay? This is the sword of the Spirit. Okay? When we get this in us, it comes out of us. Right? There is no weapon formed against us that can prosper, because we can take this and defeat it in a second. Right? Okay. So this is what's important about the coming of Messiah, because the salvation that we have been given is the beginning and not the end. We have a fight. And we're in a fight right now. We don't see it right now in Kenya as much as you do in the rest of the world. We are blessed here. Trust me. Okay? So, when we speak about the birth of the Messiah, we need to look at all the battles that were fought in order to make sure that this bloodline stayed. We have Rahab, a prostitute, right? Who hid. God used a prostitute to hide the 2 spies in order so the men could make it to the promised land. All these things were coming against the Israelites right from the time of Abraham, right till the time Jesus was born. So the real miracle is that all those obstacles, I know we like to focus every year on the beautiful birth story in Bethlehem and the wise men that came, the Magi, and that's a great story. Okay, let's take that story and look at Herod. Herod was a psychopath, right? That guy was a psychopath. That guy killed his own sons because he was scared they were going to go against him, right? This guy was a paranoid schizophrenic, probably. I don't know, right? But it wasn't good, right? And when the Magi slighted him and took off and didn't come back and tell him where Jesus was, what does he do? He killed all the children, right? Okay. Again, a miracle. Jesus survives. Right? Jesus goes through all these things right up until he fulfills the exact prophecy of crucifixion. We're going to open our